Hello.
Hello, hello.
Good to see you guys back. Well, I guess we can't see you. You can see us.
Yes.
Or listen to us. Good to have
Whatever
you
you're
back.
doing. Yeah.
Today we are going to talk about the importance of setting boundaries, and we definitely have touched on this like in different shapes and forms on different things, but we thought we would kind of chat about it more today. And it's kind of like drawing a line on certain things and saying this is important to me, and this is how a boundary. And so a boundary basically means you're setting a boundary of I'm going to use a very firm example. This is when I check my emails. That's a great example, and really probably easy for most of us to like identify with. So, so boundary is something that you're saying, this is how far I'll go in this thing, or this is when I will do it, and not past that. Yeah. And I think we're talking about this in general in life, but this goes for both life and business, obviously. It may be a boundary you put in a relationship and that kind of thing to protect yourself or your health or that kind of thing. So it spreads very wide. Very, very wide. You may need to set in certain boundaries because of a family circumstance, because of your kids, something they're going through, that kind of stuff. And so, we thought we would talk about that and why, some practical examples of what we do. Some stuff is more personal that we're obviously, not going to share of some boundaries. But some stuff is things that maybe we have for sure learned over the years. And I think putting that line in the sand, I had such a cheesy way of saying it, but it is true. Putting that line in the sand with certain things is so helpful because if you're in a relationship with somebody, they can hold you accountable to it too. If you've spoken it out loud, you could do that with a friend as well. But it reminds you like, oh no, wait, like if you start to do something that is outside of your boundary, like I said, I wasn't going to do this, that kind of thing. And throughout our seasons of life, those will look different. The kinds of boundaries you set will look different. Ours look drastically different than they did like 5 years ago, and that kind of stuff because of the things that you learn about yourself as you go. What are some boundaries that you have?
I have?
Yeah, I'm putting you on the spot first.
You're putting me on the spot. Let's see.
Ones that you're comfortable sharing. I'm sure there's some you don't need to share, but...
let's see. A simple boundary that I would have would be I don't answer emails after 5:30.
But you sometimes...
For the most part.
Yes.
So
it doesn't have to be perfect.
It's not a perfect boundary, but I really try to make sure that that's something that I don't... that I stick to and that I stay committed to because, again, I think what happens for me, especially because of how I'm wired a little bit, is if I jump into that after a certain amount of time, then I feel obligated to like maybe even go back to work later on in the evening or things like that. And so a clear good boundary for me would be, not checking my email or engaging in emails after a certain amount of time in the evening. Again, I'm not perfect, but I try to stick to it as best I can.
Yeah, and I think on something, it's so hard when we have like, you can put your email on anything now. So, I have an Apple Watch on. I could have it pop up on here if I wanted to. And so that's a boundary I have set. Again, it looks like very different and stuff like that for everybody. But for me, I don't have work emails on my phone. So it's often someone will say, well, just like if we're in a situation, I just emailed that to you. And I'm like, great. Can you text it if I need it? Like, because I don't have access to it on my phone. Yes, there are times where I'm like, if I just had it on my phone, that would be so much easier. But in general, I've chosen not to have my phone because it's, like Pat just said, it's way too easy for me that then in the evening when we're sitting down relaxing, just before dinner, first thing in the morning, whatever it may be, for me to get on there and like check work email. Now, I do have... I will sometimes put it on there when we're traveling because I don't want to be like on our computer. So there are some times if we're traveling and we're working too, not if we're on holiday.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah.
There are some times that is the case. I have my personal email on there, but normally that's just whatever. And so that is something that I do as boundary. People find it really weird, to be honest. I've had several people like, they'll honestly will say, that's a really good idea. Because I'll be like, it's too tempting for me if it's on my phone to be on it all the time. They're like, that's a really good idea. But then they're also kind of looking at me like, So I think sometimes when you set boundaries, actually, that's not the purpose of it. It's for your own health. But sometimes maybe we're, I don't know, showing people that, what's the right way to say that? Like
giving people inspiration on maybe something they could do in their life.
Yeah, there. Oh, there you go. That was
Yeah.
that was much better said than what I was going to say. I don't know what I lost my, so,
Yeah.
so that is boundary. We have, I think of the things that cause you stress in your life. Some of those we can't avoid them. Some of them we can. Like, it would be stressful for you if you checked your email and then you realized, at 8 o'clock you're jumping back into work. Yes, there are occasional times that stuff happens and it's necessary. But they're all just some things we've learned of living in the culture here in Europe and in the UK, of boundaries that us tend to be, not always, but tend to be as Americans, that we don't set boundaries on things. There are a lot of things that we do not set boundaries on. And I would say things like work and the work hours are things that we tend to not set boundaries on in the States, wouldn't you say? That's
well,
the case?
I think the expectation is a little bit different in the States compared to what the expectation is here.
So
on when work is done and when it's, I mean, to be honest, I was with a friend and, we were hanging out on the weekend and he had to end up taking a phone call from work. So, I mean, I think it does tend, it happens
I don't want to make a blanket
it's not perfect
statement.
here.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the separation between work and personal is vastly different than what we experienced in the States.
Yeah.
And the expectations with that.
Yeah. So an example would be like when we were previously working, now when we owned our own business, we could, make our own hours and stuff. When we were previously working for things, if you were on a holiday or vacation, you were still meant to be checking your emails and stuff and responding and kind of like, I can take care of that when I get back, or here's a quick thing to respond and stuff like that.
You were loosely available.
And that kind of stuff. When I was on a quote unquote maternity leave, that's a whole other conversation. That was actually disability leave or short-term disability, all this stuff. You would think that had been seen as like a time of like, we're not supposed to contact her. I was expected to be on my emails and check my emails and stuff. And so there's a funny meme that's going around. We may have mentioned this before. A funny meme that has gone around several times, and I feel like it just makes its rounds and stuff like that, especially when we're Americans that live here, of the idea that here it's like you get a response email and it says to somebody, so sorry, I'm holiday for 3 weeks. I will check my email 2 days after I get back. I'll be getting through my emails. And then it's an American and it says, so sorry, I'm not responding to emails right now. I'm in a kidney transplant. As soon as I get out of the surgery, I'll be responding to emails. And there are certain months in the month of August here when you reach out to somebody, it's almost like you can't get a whole lot done because people are on holiday a lot during that time of the month and stuff like that, or that month.
I mean, a lot of times things just shut down here.
I mean, that is true. So, a lot of restaurants and stuff shut down in different seasons because, I think they know obviously their foot traffic won't be enough, maybe, possibly. And then they also want to give their people time off. So a lot of the signs, there'll just be a handmade written sign that will say, we're off for the month of August to let our employees have time off and with their families.
Yeah.
And that's just so common. I don't know that I've ever seen that in the States of something like that. It's like, you never know, like they keep going, that kind of thing. And so, but that's boundaries that you can decide to make. And so if you're saying like on my weekends, I am not working now, your schedule may be different. You may have a site. We've had times where we've had multiple jobs. Weekends have been work and that kind of thing. But whatever it is for you, you know, a set of time that you're not working, you're not responding to things, that kind of thing, it is like is another kind of boundary. A boundary may be that you have a boundary with like a family member for a reason. And that I don't want to go into details of that because I think that could be very different for everybody. It could be like an extreme case of like a safety issue, and it could be a case of like the amount of stress it causes you when you're around that person. And those boundaries may be like, I know when I see them, I'm only spending like 2 hours with them, and that's kind of my cutoff place, and maybe I'm not seeing them at all because of this certain thing of whatever it may be. And so those are those are some other like relationship boundaries, I guess is the way you would say it, that you may think about putting in place or looking at as well. And I think the importance of all of these is just it's taking yourself and realizing that like you can't just be everywhere all at once. Oh, that's what almost the name of the movie, huh?
Yeah.
That you can't do that. You can't please everyone. that you often don't need to explain your boundary. I would say you find that difficult. Both of us find that difficult, don't we?
Yeah, that's a
of
good point.
saying no, but then giving the excuse.
Yeah, I mean, I can't.
We did
I
do a
think this is a
podcast,
boundary. I think we might have even talked about this a little bit, but like for Maya and I, we have a certain type of boundary where we don't necessarily commit to something in the moment, like especially if it deals with both of us. That we have to give it at least 24 hours, that we have a conversation about it and things like that. And like, and that's like for us, that's just really healthy for us to have that boundary because, one, for scheduling because of all the things that, we're doing and the different things that our kids are doing and all that kind of stuff. And then also too, it's just more of like making sure we're all on the same page, I think is really key for us. And so I think that's a boundary. Call that a boundary.
No,
like,
I would say that's a boundary.
That you don't say yes or no to something in the moment when it potentially involves both of us. That makes sense.
Yeah. And I think the thing too, I would say is like, we may have like, we've gone through seasons where we've had a certain night of the week that is like, this is our time for our family. And that's a boundary that we keep. It doesn't mean that it means 100% of the time. There could be something come up that we'll then have a discussion to say, actually, like, I know Wednesday nights are typically our family night or a date night or whatever it may be, but this thing has come up. Is it okay if I do this? But what we try not to do is make sure the boundary is pretty in place so that that's not constantly happening. It would be a very special occasion.
Or you, like for that instance, we would trade a different night and say, okay, well then if Wednesdays is always our family night and something actually we need to do on that night, then maybe we switch it to Friday night that night or that week or whatever.
Some things are out of your control. Often it'll be something with the kids that it's like, we can't ask the school to change that day.
Yeah.
because of, our family night or something. But we don't always have to go to everything and participate in everything either. And so that's another, boundary setting thing of like, you get to make decisions on that and you don't have to explain yourself. I tend to sometimes say, no, I've got this going on and that kind of stuff. But it's harder when your reason is like, no, because that's when I typically don't work. That's an easier one. To say, no, that's our family night. That sounds a little weird to some people, that is just when I typically relax or something like that. Like, again, that's why you can just like, we say to our kids all the time, no is a complete sentence. And I have to often remember that too. You can say it nice and just say no. You can say, sorry, not available then, that kind of thing. Often, sometimes people will come back to me and say, oh, like, especially if they're wanting to get together or something like that. Oh, when are you available then? And then we can give options and it can be back and forth thing. Don't like half commit to things. I think that's the thing with like, if you're going to set a boundary in something, don't slightly commit to it and then back out at the last minute because you decide you want a boundary there. You have the option to that, obviously, but I think it's really that damages relationships and stuff.
I think that's a good point. Like the idea of boundaries are hopefully helping you be in a place that allows you that answer rather than being kind of a maybe or a yes maybe or no maybe, in that weird limbo space where if you're setting appropriate boundaries in certain things like that, hopefully will allow you to give that definite answer. So
I think too, like boundaries can be things too that you have like with your money or things like that. Like they call it a budget. A boundary would be a budget, or those kind of things of like, just thinking again, what are the boundaries? And I think it's so important if you have kids, it teaches them a lot to see you set certain boundaries and things. We've had some weeks where we've thrown out the boundaries completely and we've committed to something every single night of the week. And we have like a family calendar on a whiteboard that we keep. And sometimes if we sit down at the beginning of the week with that with the kids, they'll be like, wow, you guys have a lot going on. Why'd you do that? But because we've showed them, like, this is actually what our normal rhythm is, they pick up on when we have maybe let go of a boundary or that kind of thing. And it does help them then. And it helps us in setting boundaries for them because, gosh, that's so much of parenting, isn't it? Of setting boundaries for your kids, for them to work within those boundaries, to learn about challenges and stuff, but they're boundary points.
They don't like to learn in those boundaries, though.
No, they don't. Sure. And they'll of course push them. Or if you've set a boundary like, no, this is your bedtime, which is the one we're getting pushback from now because we've read enough studies, we know what it says, you need this much sleep, but as they get older, they of course want to keep pushing that up, more and more and more. And then we have let them do it a couple times, and then the next day they've learned That's why you put that boundary in. It's like that the next day or the next day, they're exhausted. And we're like, exactly. This is, mom and dad sometimes know, not all the time.
Yeah.
So you can kind of think of those kind of things when you can see it in your kid and you're like, that's also why I shouldn't do that, you know? And so it's a reminder sometimes of the importance of those, of the setting of the boundaries. And I think, again, like we said before, it's a seasonal thing. And so your boundaries may be one thing in one season as things start to change in your life or your circumstances, where you live, that kind of thing, a family circumstance, all of that, like the boundaries might change. But if you're in a partnership, it's really important to talk about that and make a decision together. If you're in a family, it's important to talk about that. Or, you know, like have a conversation with somebody and figure out like, okay, what are the new healthy boundaries I need? Or sometimes you don't realize you need a boundary until it's gotten down the road.
That's true.
And you're like, I'm feeling really overwhelmed in this, or like, why can't I ever shut off, or those kind of things. And then there's a new boundary that needs to be put in place. It's just paying attention. It's never this is my boundary
is it,
forever.
And it's set forever. Yeah.
Or I don't have boundaries in this area, because likely you'll end up having it at some point. But the boundaries protect us in so many different ways, but they also need to change at times too.
I think just thinking about it in a holistic kind of viewpoint, it just helps you thrive. Like, I think that's like the word I would say. Like, it just helps you thrive in a different way, in a good way. And even thinking about like our kids, and from like a kid's perspective, like obviously they struggle with certain boundaries that we put in place for them. But our hope is, right, that as parents, that these are things that are going to set them up to thrive moving forward. And that's kind of how I see it. Like, maybe,
fingers crossed, maybe later in life, they'll be like, oh, I see why you had that boundary.
Yeah, exactly.
That'll be the dream.
Yeah, definitely.
We will see. We will see if that happens. But they have said it a couple times.
Yeah.
But we're not going to.
Every once in a while we'll get that. Oh, I see why you do that. Okay.
I see why that's a rule in our house. Okay, well, thanks.
Well, and rule and boundary are different things.
Yeah, well, true. Sometimes that boundary to a kid is a rule because that's the wording that they use. And then we do a tiny little celebration when they don't see that. They're like, they understand it. But that's so rare. So let's not pretend like that happens all the time. But
true.
Yeah, so that is our quick thought process on setting boundaries and why they are so important. And I think I don't want to say our challenge to you is, but in some ways it is really like and the only way we come up with our boundaries is to kind of sit down together or sit down individually and think like, what are some areas of stress? There are going to be certain times that are more stressful, but is there some kind of boundaries I can put around those? Is there something that would be helpful in me navigating this? And often that is kind of putting a boundary around something. And then the hardest thing is to like actually initiate that boundary and to actually put it into action.
Especially if it's new, yeah.
Yeah, and to try and stick with it,
yeah.
But be willing to change it if it needs to be changed. So, but it's the way that you just that you're able to draw the line in many ways, but also to be flexible in some places. It's not a hard line, and that hopefully the boundaries will bring more health in your life.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining. You can find our podcast and stuff on LorentCollective.com. And you can also find us on, I was about ready to say Amazon, and that is not what I mean, Instagram. At Laurent Collective, and we'd love to hear from you there. Take care, and we'll talk to you next time.
See ya.
Bye.